Welcome back to the channel. If you're here late at night looking for a story to drift off to, you're in the right place. Before we begin, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. On the morning of September 4th, just after 8:20 a.m., emergency dispatchers in Santa Clarita, California, received a call that immediately raised alarms. The man on the line identified himself as Daniel Wu, his voice uneven, struggling to stay steady. He said he had just entered his partner's townhouse and found her and their infant son unresponsive. He kept repeating one sentence, as if saying it enough times might make it less real. "They're not breathing. Please hurry." Police units were dispatched within minutes. Paramedics followed close behind. When officers arrived at the gated residential complex, they were led upstairs to a second-floor unit. The front door was closed but unlocked. Inside, the scene was silent and still. Daniel's partner, Lena Zhao, was lying on the living room floor. Their 5-month-old son was found nearby, wrapped in a light blanket. Both were pronounced dead at the scene. There were no signs of forced entry, no obvious weapon, no shattered furniture, just a calm apartment holding something deeply wrong. As crime scene tape went up and neighbors were quietly ushered away, detectives from the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department took over. A forensic team began their work, while one officer remained with Daniel to take his statement. Daniel said he had flown in from Hong Kong earlier that morning. Lena had promised to pick him up at the airport with their baby so he could finally meet his son in person, but no one was there when his flight landed. He waited, sent messages, called repeatedly. When there was no response, he took a taxi to Lena's address. In the underground parking garage, he noticed her red Toyota Corolla parked in its usual spot. That reassured him. He assumed she had simply fallen asleep or missed her alarm. At her door, he knocked for several minutes. There was no answer. He contacted building management and asked for help, introducing himself as her husband. But management checked their records. Daniel was not listed as an emergency contact. Without authorization, they refused to open the unit. He waited in the hallway for hours. Close to midnight, frustrated and anxious, Daniel tried the door one more time. It opened. What he found inside changed everything. Detectives listened carefully as Daniel spoke. His timeline was checked against flight records, immigration stamps, and airport surveillance. Everything matched. He could not have been in the apartment when the deaths occurred. By early afternoon, he was officially ruled out as a suspect. That decision, however, did not make the case easier. It made it harder. Inside the apartment, investigators found something unsettling in its absence. No fingerprints that didn't belong, no footprints, no murder weapon, no sign of struggle that would normally accompany such violence. It was as if someone had entered quietly, acted with intent, and left without a trace. That kind of control did not come from panic. It came from planning. The estimated time of death placed the incident roughly 18 to 24 hours before Daniel arrived. Whoever did this knew Lena was alone, and whoever did this knew exactly where to go. Because the victims were Chinese nationals and the reporting party lived overseas, the case quickly expanded beyond local jurisdiction. The Chinese consulate in Los Angeles was notified to assist in contacting Lena's family. When her parents arrived days later, they were in shock. Not only had they lost their daughter, they were learning for the first time that she had a child. That revelation raised new questions. Why had Lena hidden such a major part of her life, and from whom? Her parents described Lena as accomplished, disciplined, and private. She had grown up in Qingyuan, a coastal city in eastern China. Her father was a civil engineer. Her mother worked as a hospital physician. Education had always been the center of their household. Lena excelled early. She was admitted to a top-tier university to study chemical engineering and graduated with honors. She was known for her athleticism, her height, and a calm confidence that made people trust her quickly. After university, she joined a luxury hospitality group and rose through the ranks fast. By her mid-20s, she was already working closely with senior executives and international clients. It was during that time that she met Victor Liang. Victor was a Taiwanese-born tech magnate, nearly 25 years her senior. His communications company had operations across Asia and North America. In business circles, he was known as precise, charismatic, and relentless. When Victor stayed at Lena's hotel during a regional expansion project, he noticed her immediately. What began as professional interaction slowly became personal. Within a year, Lena left her job and relocated to Shanghai, where Victor hired her as his personal executive assistant. He arranged an upscale apartment, covered all expenses, traveled with her frequently. To outsiders, it looked like a serious relationship. What no one knew at the time was that Victor was already married. His wife, Grace Liang, was not a silent partner. She was a co-founder of the company. Many of its assets were jointly registered under both their names. They had built the business together from the ground up and had 2 sons studying abroad in the United States. Grace first became suspicious when their home phone records showed repeated long-distance calls to the same number. When she pressed Victor, he dismissed it as work. Then she found lipstick stains on his shirts. Eventually, the truth came out. Victor admitted the affair, but insisted it meant nothing long-term. He promised to cut contact. Grace, furious but pragmatic, chose not to dismantle her family or the company. But the affair did not end. Instead, it evolved. Lena became pregnant. She traveled to the United States to give birth, telling her parents she had received an academic opportunity. Victor purchased a townhouse in Santa Clarita, a quiet area far from his usual business footprint. The property was registered under a holding company connected to assets he shared with Grace. Lena believed this meant security. Grace saw it as betrayal. Phone calls between the 2 women escalated. Tension turned to hostility. At one point, Grace flew to California unannounced. A confrontation occurred inside the townhouse. Voices were raised, accusations thrown. Victor tried to intervene. His actions, seen as protective of Lena, only deepened his resentment. After that, Grace returned to Taiwan. On the surface, things went quiet, until the day Lena and her child were found dead. For detectives, the case now pointed in a dangerous direction. Motive was emerging, history was layered with conflict, and one detail from the autopsy would soon change everything. During the forensic examination, the medical examiner noted a bite mark on Lena's arm. A saliva sample was collected. At the time, it was just another data point. Soon, it would become the key. But first, investigators needed to understand the woman who had died, what she believed, what she expected, and what she may have threatened without realizing it. Because sometimes the most dangerous moment in a crime is not the act itself, it is the moment someone believes they have finally won. The bite mark on Lena Zhao's arm was small, almost easy to dismiss. At first glance, it looked like a defensive injury, something that might occur during a brief struggle. But for the forensic examiner, it stood out immediately, not because of its severity, but because of its clarity. Human bite marks are rare in homicide cases. Clear ones are even rarer. The medical examiner photographed the mark from multiple angles, took measurements, and carefully collected a saliva swab from the wound. At the time, investigators had no suspect to compare it to, but they knew one thing. Whoever left that mark had been physically close to Lena, close enough to cross every personal boundary. That level of contact was intimate, emotional, personal. It did not suggest a random intruder. Back at the sheriff's department, detectives began reconstructing Lena's final days. They pulled phone records, reviewed email accounts, and subpoenaed messaging apps. What they found painted a picture of rising pressure. In the weeks before her death, Lena had made several long phone calls to Victor Liang, many of them late at night. Some lasted over an hour. The tone of the messages recovered from her phone suggested urgency, even impatience. She was pushing for something. Friends in California described Lena as increasingly anxious, but also strangely confident. She spoke about changes coming soon and hinted that her life was about to become more secure. One friend recalled Lena saying, "Things won't stay hidden much longer." Investigators took note of that sentence. Victor, when questioned again, admitted that Lena had been pressuring him to formalize their relationship. She wanted financial guarantees for their son. She wanted recognition, and according to him, she wanted his wife out of the picture. Victor claimed he refused. He insisted he loved his child, but would never abandon his family or dismantle the company. Divorce, he said, would have destroyed everything he had built. Detectives asked the obvious question: had he shared this refusal with Grace? Victor paused. Then he said yes. That answer shifted the investigation. Grace Liang had always presented herself as controlled and composed. When detectives first contacted her in Taiwan, she spoke calmly. She acknowledged knowing about the affair, but said she had moved past it. She claimed she had not been in California recently. But flight records told a different story. Grace had entered the United States 6 days before Lena's estimated time of death. She had flown into Los Angeles under her own name and stayed at a private residence registered to an LLC connected to Victor's assets. That residence was less than 3 miles from Lena's townhouse. When detectives confronted Victor with this information, he looked genuinely shaken. He said Grace had told him she was traveling for business. He claimed he had no idea she was in California at that time. Investigators were not convinced. They requested cooperation from Victor to obtain a voluntary DNA sample from Grace for comparison with the saliva recovered from the bite mark. Victor hesitated, but eventually agreed, believing it would clear his wife. The first comparison was done using a sample Grace had previously provided during a routine medical exam connected to immigration paperwork. The results came back within days. It was a match. Not partial, not inconclusive. A full match. The room went silent when the lab report was reviewed. Detectives now knew that Grace Liang had been physically present with Lena during the incident. There was no innocent explanation for that. But knowing someone was present was not the same as proving murder. They needed more. Security footage from the townhouse complex showed nothing unusual. No forced entry, no suspicious figures. But detectives noticed something subtle. There were several blind spots between camera zones, areas where a person could move without being recorded. Those blind spots aligned perfectly with the route from the street to Lena's front door. Someone had studied the layout. Phone records added another layer. On the morning of the incident, Grace's phone briefly connected to a local cell tower near Lena's home. The signal lasted only minutes, then disappeared. After that, the phone was turned off for several hours. When detectives contacted Grace again, this time requesting a formal interview in the United States, she agreed. Victor was asked to bring her in under the pretense of resolving legal matters related to the company. Grace arrived at the sheriff's office, visibly confused, but still composed. At first, she denied everything. She claimed she had not seen Lena in years. She claimed the DNA evidence must be a mistake. She questioned the legality of the saliva collection and accused the police of targeting her unfairly. But then detectives showed her the lab report. They showed her the phone records. They showed her the flight manifests. And finally, they showed her a photograph of the bite mark. Something changed. Her posture collapsed slightly. Her voice softened. And then she asked one question. Did she say anything about me? That was the moment investigators knew they were close. Grace requested a lawyer, but before one arrived, she began speaking, slowly, carefully, as if choosing each word to protect herself as much as possible. She admitted she had contacted Lena shortly before the incident. She said Lena had called her first, mocking her, reminding her that she had given Victor a son. She claimed Lena spoke confidently about inheritance, about property, about replacing her. Grace said she felt humiliated. She said she felt trapped. According to her account, she went to Lena's home intending only to talk. She claimed emotions escalated, that Lena laughed at her, that words turned cruel. Then she said she lost control. Grace admitted to biting Lena during the confrontation. She admitted being in the apartment, but she stopped short of confessing to murder. She described what happened next as blurred. She said she left in shock. Detectives pressed her gently but firmly. They asked about the child. They asked how a conversation turned into 2 deaths. Grace stopped answering. The interview ended there. Within days, she was formally arrested and charged with 2 counts of homicide. The case exploded in the media. Public reaction was divided. Some saw Grace as a woman driven beyond endurance. Others saw her as calculating and entitled, unwilling to accept consequences. Victor became a central figure of scrutiny. Prosecutors questioned whether he encouraged or facilitated the confrontation, whether his actions or inaction had set the stage. During the first trial, Grace pled not guilty. Her defense argued that the evidence was circumstantial, that the DNA proved contact, not intent, that her confession was obtained under emotional distress. They also raised questions about Victor's role, about financial motive, about whether he stood to gain from Lena and the child disappearing. In a dramatic turn, Grace retracted her earlier admissions and accused investigators of coercion. The jury, however, was unconvinced. She was found guilty and sentenced to life imprisonment without parole. But the case did not end there. Appeals followed. Evidence was challenged. A second trial was ordered due to procedural issues surrounding the initial confession. During the retrial, prosecutors introduced a new theory that Victor, fearing exposure and financial ruin, may have known more than he admitted. They suggested that Grace had acted not alone. Public opinion shifted again. Under mounting pressure, Grace eventually changed her plea. She admitted responsibility, but argued that the crime was not premeditated. She claimed diminished capacity, emotional collapse, and provocation. Letters poured into the court, over 400 of them. Some demanded justice, others pleaded for mercy. One letter came from Victor himself. He described Grace as a devoted mother, a business partner, a woman who had been betrayed and pushed too far. He asked the court to show compassion. In the end, the judge reduced the sentence. Grace was sentenced to 11 years with eligibility for early release. After serving 7 years, she was deported. The official case closed, but the questions did not. How had a petite woman overpowered someone physically stronger? Why were certain financial records never fully examined? And why did Victor vanish from public life soon after the case closed? The truth, as always, lay somewhere between evidence and silence, and for many, it was not enough. By the time the third trial concluded, the courtroom no longer felt like a place of discovery. It felt like a place of exhaustion. Everyone involved had already lived through years of testimony, appeals, rewritten narratives, and shifting truths. Lena Zhao and her infant son had been gone for nearly a decade, yet their absence still dominated every sentence spoken in court. Grace Liang sat at the defense table, older now, thinner, her once controlled presence replaced by visible wear. The confidence that had marked her early interviews was gone. In its place was something quieter, resignation perhaps, or calculation. No one could say for sure. This time, Grace did not deny being responsible, but she refused to accept the word murder. Her legal team argued that what happened inside that townhouse was not a planned act, but a psychological collapse triggered by prolonged emotional abuse, betrayal, and fear of losing everything she had built over a lifetime. They emphasized the phone calls, the taunts, the implied threats to inheritance and status. They framed Lena not as an innocent victim, but as an active participant in a long-running power struggle. The prosecution pushed back hard. They argued that nothing justified the killing of a woman and her child. that Grace had traveled internationally, concealed her movements, avoided cameras, and left no signs of forced entry. Those were not the actions of someone who had simply lost control. Those were the actions of someone who had decided. At the center of everything, though, remained Victor Liang. He was never charged, but his shadow loomed over every hearing. Prosecutors revisited his financial arrangements. They examined property ownership structures, offshore accounts, and trust documents created shortly before Lena's death. None of it crossed the legal threshold for criminal conspiracy, but it raised uncomfortable questions. Why had Lena believed she was secure when no assets had ever been transferred into her name? Why had Victor continued encouraging her emotionally while refusing to formalize anything legally? And why, after the crime, did he disappear almost entirely from public life? Once a frequent presence at tech conferences and business forums, Victor quietly stepped away from leadership roles. His company restructured, his name was removed from press releases. Associates said he moved between countries, living out of private residences, rarely staying anywhere long. Some believed he was grieving. Others believed he was hiding. Grace, in her final statement to the court, described herself as a woman abandoned by morality, by loyalty, and by fate. She said she regretted everything, but maintained that she had not woken up that morning intending to destroy lives. She spoke about her children, about how she had failed them, about how she would carry the weight of that night forever. The judge listened without interruption. Then he delivered the sentence. Grace Liang was convicted of voluntary manslaughter rather than murder. She was sentenced to 11 years in prison with credit for time served and eligibility for early release due to good behavior and lack of prior criminal record. The courtroom reacted with mixed emotion. Some felt justice had been diluted. Others felt the outcome acknowledged complexity rather than ignoring it. Grace served 7 years before being released and deported. She returned to Taiwan quietly. No interviews, no public statements, no attempts to explain herself further. She vanished from public view. The case, officially, was closed. Unofficially, it never was. Online forums continued to debate unanswered questions. True crime writers dissected inconsistencies. One detail in particular refused to fade. Lena had been tall, athletic, physically strong. Grace was not. Could she really have acted alone? Some theorized that Victor's eldest son, who was in the United States at the time, might have been present. Others speculated that a private security contractor or associate had helped stage the scene. There was never evidence strong enough to reopen the investigation, and perhaps that was the point. The system does not pursue truth forever. It pursues it until the paperwork is complete. Lena's parents returned to China with an emptiness that no verdict could fill. They raised their remaining daughter's children with caution and silence, rarely speaking about the granddaughter they had never met. Daniel Wu returned to Hong Kong and withdrew from public life. Friends said he struggled with guilt for years, replaying the decision to wait outside that locked door instead of forcing it open sooner. Whether that would have changed anything is unknowable. The townhouse in Santa Clarita was sold, renovated, repainted. New families moved in. Most never learned what had happened there. And Victor Liang? He remains the most unresolved figure of all. Some say he remarried quietly. Others claim he lives alone, surrounded by wealth that no longer brings comfort. Former associates describe him as distant, haunted, uninterested in the empire he once obsessed over. Perhaps his punishment was not delivered by a judge. Perhaps it arrived in the form of permanent regret. This case shocked audiences across continents, not because it was mysterious, but because it was painfully human. It was driven by ego, secrecy, and the belief that consequences could always be controlled. Lena believed love would protect her. Grace believed loyalty entitled her to everything.
Victor believed he could balance two lives without losing either. They were all wrong, and a child paid the highest price. In the end, the most chilling truth was found not in DNA reports or court transcripts. It was found in the silence that followed, when everyone involved had to live with what they had chosen and what they had destroyed. Some crimes end with answers, others end with echoes. This one never truly ended at all.
On the morning of October 14th, 2011, an older man from Aoyama Town, located in Japan's Mizuno Prefecture, prepared for a routine he had followed for decades. Autumn had settled into the mountains. The air was crisp, the ground carpeted with fallen leaves, and wild mushrooms were beginning to surface after the recent rains. Carrying a woven basket and a small knife, the man headed into the wooded slopes of Mount Kurahane, a popular but quiet hiking area known mostly to locals. Near a rocky hillside, close to a steep drop, something pale caught his attention beneath the leaves. At first, he thought it was a large mushroom cap, unusually shaped but promising. He stepped closer, brushed aside the leaves, and reached down. That was when he realized what he was looking at. What lay beside the rock was not part of the forest. Frozen in shock, the man stumbled backward. His basket fell. He turned and ran downhill, heart pounding, nearly tripping over roots as he struggled to pull his phone from his pocket. I found a human head," he shouted when the call connected, his voice breaking as he repeated the words again and again. Within minutes, police vehicles were climbing the narrow mountain road. The area was sealed off, and officers followed the man's shaking directions. What they found confirmed the worst. The remains were badly decomposed. Identification was impossible at the scene. What disturbed investigators even more was the absence of blood, suggesting the location was not where the crime had occurred. This was not an accident. Recognizing the seriousness of the discovery, authorities launched a large-scale operation. More than 300 officers were deployed to search the surrounding forest. Since Mount Kurahane sat near the border between Mizuno Prefecture and Harada Prefecture, police from both regions formed a joint task force. Over the next several days, more discoveries were made along the slope below the cliff. Each finding reinforced the same conclusion. The remains belonged to one individual, and they had been deliberately scattered. A forensic examination later confirmed that the victim was a young woman and the injuries were inflicted after death. The estimated time of death placed the crime between late September and early October. The mountain, once a peaceful place, became the center of a national investigation. A name without a face. Police began cross-referencing missing person reports from both prefectures. The breakthrough came from Harada Prefecture. A family had reported their daughter missing on October 2nd. Her name was Airi Takahashi, 19 years old. A first-year student at Seishin Women's University, Airi had left her hometown in Kadawa Bay City to attend university, full of optimism and ambition. When DNA samples were collected from her family, the results confirmed what investigators feared. The remains found on Mount Kurahane belonged to Airi. News of the identification spread quickly. National media descended on the area. Reporters broadcast live from the forest entrance. Candlelight memorials appeared outside the university gates. Then something strange happened. A television crew filming a late-night segment near the mountain later reported hearing a faint female voice in their footage. When the audio was replayed, some listeners claimed to hear the words, "Why did this happen?" The station quietly pulled the clip. Online forums exploded. Some dismissed it as background noise. Others believed it was something else entirely. The mountain quickly gained a reputation that went beyond crime. Fear settled into the community in a way police could not control. Who was Airi Takahashi? Investigators turned their attention to Airi's life. She had been described by friends as gentle, hardworking, and introverted. She had no known enemies, no romantic relationships, no history of conflict. Professors described her as disciplined and polite, someone who never caused trouble. Since childhood, Airi had dreamed of seeing the world. She hoped to study abroad someday, particularly in Eastern Europe, where she was fascinated by language and history. To help ease the financial burden on her parents, she took a part-time job at a small dessert cafe located about 2 kilometers from campus. Her shifts ended around 9 p.m. Normally, students took the bus back to campus. Airi didn't. She walked. The route cut through a narrow wooded area. During the day, it was unremarkable. At night, it was silent, unlit, isolated. At first, she walked with a friend who worked nearby, but that arrangement ended when her friend found another job closer to campus. After that, Airi walked alone. Friends later recalled her mentioning that the walk frightened her, especially as autumn nights grew darker. They urged her to take the bus. She always declined, saying she wanted to save money and that the walk wasn't that long. In late September, she told her roommate she planned to quit the cafe soon and find something closer. She never got the chance. The night she vanished. On September 30th, Airi finished her shift as usual. Staff members remembered her taking out a trash bag as she left, saying she would dispose of it along the way. Security cameras captured her walking toward the forest path. That was the last confirmed sighting. She never reached her dorm. The cafe owner noticed her absence the next day when she didn't arrive for work. Assuming there had been a misunderstanding, they contacted her parents. They were immediately alarmed. Airi called home daily, sometimes more than once. They had not heard from her since the previous night. Her phone went unanswered. They contacted the dorm manager. Airi had not returned. On October 2nd, they reported her missing. At first, police treated the case cautiously. There was no evidence of violence, no body, no witnesses. The investigation progressed slowly. That changed everything when the discovery was made on Mount Kurahane. The forest knows more. With the case now confirmed as homicide, investigators focused on the forest path. Students came forward with unsettling observations. Some reported seeing a white sedan lingering near the area at night in the weeks before Airi disappeared. One student said the driver had attempted to start conversations with women walking alone. Footage from nearby businesses revealed a white vehicle parked near the cafe around the time Airi finished work. The camera angle was poor. No license plate was visible. A shopping center employee recalled seeing a young woman enter a similar car that night, but could not confirm her identity. Despite extensive searches, the vehicle could not be traced. Investigators began to suspect that Airi had been targeted, that her routine had been observed, that the forest path had offered the perfect opportunity. Fear settled into the community in a way police could not control. The mountain kept its secrets. For months after the discovery on Mount Kurahane, the investigation expanded in every direction and advanced in none. The task force followed procedure with intensity. Officers interviewed hundreds of students, cafe customers, nearby residents, and hikers. They mapped Airi Takahashi's final route down to individual steps. They searched drainage ditches, abandoned sheds, and unused access roads. Dogs were brought in. Helicopters scanned the forest canopy. Nothing decisive emerged. The white sedan became the center of attention, but it remained a ghost. Traffic cameras were limited in that area in 2011. Private cameras existed, but most recorded over their footage within days. What little remained showed only fragments: a white shape, a reflection, a headlight flare. No plate, no face, no direction of travel. Investigators considered whether Erie might have known her attacker. Her phone records were analyzed carefully: calls to her parents, messages to classmates, cafe work chats. Nothing unusual stood out. There were no secret contacts, no suspicious late-night conversations, no digital trail pointing toward danger. Her laptop revealed essays, study plans, and a partially written journal entry about feeling tired and homesick. There was no mention of fear, threats, or strange encounters. The absence of warning was unsettling. It suggested this was not a crime born from conflict, but from opportunity. That possibility disturbed police even more. A theory forms. By early winter, investigators developed a working theory. They believed Erie had been approached while walking through the forest path. The offender likely used a vehicle to intercept her, possibly offering a ride. Whether she accepted voluntarily or was forced remained unclear. What was clear was that Mount Kurahane was not close to her route. Someone had driven her there. The mountain was familiar to locals, but not to students. It was accessible by narrow service roads used mostly by maintenance workers and experienced hikers. Choosing that location suggested knowledge, not chance. Police began reviewing vehicle registrations of white sedans within a wide radius. Thousands of owners were questioned. Most were cooperative, some were angry, a few refused to speak without lawyers. Still, nothing stuck. Without a suspect, the case slowly lost momentum. Media attention faded. News stories replaced it. The mountain grew quiet again. But among students, fear never fully disappeared. Rumors and shadows. As the investigation stalled, rumors filled the space left by answers. Some claimed a serial offender was targeting young women near universities. Others insisted the killer was a local who blended in too well to notice. There were whispers about a man seen walking the forest path late at night, always alone, always silent. None of it could be confirmed. Then there were the stories about the mountain. Hikers reported strange sounds at dusk, a woman crying, footsteps behind them when no one was there. A few said their phones lost signal near the cliff where the remains had been found. Police dismissed these reports publicly, but privately, officers admitted the terrain played tricks on perception. Wind moving through trees, echoes bouncing off rock faces, isolation amplifying fear. Still, even seasoned investigators felt uneasy during late searches. One officer later admitted he refused to return to the mountain after sunset. "I don't believe in ghosts, but that place felt wrong." The evidence that couldn't speak. Forensic technology in 2011 offered limited help. The remains had been exposed to weather and wildlife. DNA degradation was severe. While the cause of death could be estimated, details were lost. There were no usable fingerprints. No foreign DNA could be confidently extracted. Clothing fibers found near the remains were common materials, mass-produced and impossible to trace. The most promising lead came from soil analysis. Forensic specialists determined that some soil on the remains did not match the composition of Mount Kurahane. It suggested the body had been held elsewhere before being moved. That location, however, could not be identified with certainty. The trail ended again. By mid-2012, the case was officially classified as unsolved. The file was shelved, though not closed. Erie Takahashi became one of many names on a list that investigators hoped to revisit someday. Her parents continued to visit the police station every year on the anniversary of her disappearance. Each time, the answer was the same. There were no new developments. Time moved forward, indifferent to grief. New students arrived at Sacheen Women's University. The forest path was fitted with lights and emergency call boxes. Bus routes were expanded. Safety lectures became mandatory. Life adapted, but the case remained frozen in the past until technology caught up. A quiet breakthrough. In 2018, the National Forensic Research Institute launched a pilot program using advanced mitochondrial DNA sequencing combined with data reanalysis algorithms. The goal was to revisit cold cases where biological material had previously been considered unusable. Erie's case was selected. It was not selected because it was famous, but because it was incomplete. Samples stored years earlier were reprocessed using newer techniques capable of extracting information from severely degraded material. The process took months. When results came back, investigators felt something they hadn't felt in years: hope. The DNA sample arrived quietly. No sirens, no dramatic confrontation, just a sterile envelope delivered to the forensic lab labeled with a case number that had gathered dust for nearly 7 years. The suspect, Masato Endo, did not resist when the court order was served. He did not ask for a lawyer immediately. He offered his cheek without protest, as if the outcome no longer mattered. That calm unsettled the detectives more than anger ever could. When the results came back, there was no ambiguity left to argue over. The partial mitochondrial DNA recovered from Airi Takahashi's remains was a statistical match to Endo's genetic profile. Not a coincidence, not contamination. The probability of it belonging to another unrelated individual was astronomically low. For the first time since 2011, the investigation crossed the line between theory and truth. Endo was arrested on a cold morning in early February. The news broke slowly at first, then all at once. The man behind the name. Masato Endo was 46 years old at the time of his arrest. To neighbors, he was forgettable, quiet, polite, a man who waved but never lingered. He had no criminal record, no history of violence, no public red flags. He had worked as a municipal contractor for over a decade, maintaining hillside roads, inspecting drainage systems, and clearing trails after landslides. His job gave him unrestricted access to remote areas. It also gave him an intimate understanding of the terrain, including Mount Kurahane. When investigators searched his old employment records, they found something chilling in its ordinariness. Endo had logged maintenance work on a service road less than 1 kilometer from the location where Airi's remains were found. The entry was dated October 1st, 2011, the day after she vanished. At his current residence, police found nothing dramatic. No trophies, no hidden rooms, just a neatly kept home filled with tools, manuals, and old maps. One map, however, stood out. It showed Mount Kurahane in detail, with several routes marked in pencil. The interrogation. Endo maintained his composure during questioning. He repeated the same phrases carefully. He did not know Airi. He had never spoken to her. He had no reason to harm anyone. When investigators presented the DNA evidence, he paused, just long enough. "It must be a mistake," he said quietly, but his voice had changed. Investigators pressed harder. They laid out the pattern, the attempted abductions, the white sedan, his presence in the area. The soil analysis suggested the body had been stored elsewhere. Endo listened. Then he sighed. What followed was not a full confession, but it was enough. He admitted to encountering Airi that night. He said he offered her a ride because it was late and dangerous. He claimed she hesitated, then accepted. According to him, the situation escalated. He refused to explain how. He denied intent. He denied planning, but he could not deny being there. That was all the prosecution needed. The trial that reopened old wounds. The trial began later that year.
By then, Ayeri's name had become symbolic not just of one tragedy, but of the years the case had remained unsolved. Her parents attended every session. They listened as lawyers reconstructed their daughter's final hours in careful, clinical language. They watched as Endo sat expressionless, hands folded, eyes fixed on nothing in particular. The defense focused on doubt. They questioned the reliability of degraded DNA. They argued contamination. They emphasized the lack of eyewitnesses and the absence of a complete confession. The prosecution focused on convergence. One piece of evidence might be explainable. Several were not. DNA, vehicle ownership, employment access, geographic familiarity, pattern behavior. Together, they told a story Endo could not escape. Expert witnesses explained the new forensic technology in detail, how mitochondrial DNA persisted even when nuclear DNA failed, how algorithms reanalyzed old data without bias. The courtroom learned something unsettling. Truth does not expire, it only waits. A verdict at last. After weeks of testimony, the jury reached a verdict. Masato Endo was found guilty of murder. The sentence was life imprisonment. There was no reaction from Endo when the verdict was read, no outburst, no visible remorse. Ayeri's mother wept quietly. Her father stared straight ahead as if afraid to blink and lose the moment. Outside the courthouse, reporters asked whether justice had finally been served. Her parents did not answer. They had learned that justice and closure were not the same thing. What the case changed. The resolution of the Takahashi case sent ripples through law enforcement. Cold cases once considered hopeless were reopened. Evidence rooms were reorganized. Databases were updated. Technology that did not exist in 2011 became standard practice. But progress came with an uncomfortable realization. If this technology had existed earlier, Ayeri's killer might have been caught sooner. If streetlights had been installed sooner, she might never have been approached. If bus routes had been expanded earlier, she might not have walked alone. Justice arrived, but it arrived late. The questions that remain. Even with a conviction, some questions never received clear answers. Why Mount Kurahane? Why scatter the remains instead of hiding them completely? Why stop after Ayeri if the pattern suggested escalation? Endo never explained. He refused interviews. He declined to speak further after sentencing. In prison records, he is described as compliant, quiet, and withdrawn. Some investigators believe Ayeri was not her first attempt, only the first to end fatally. Others believe the attention surrounding her case frightened him into stopping. The truth remains locked inside a man who chose silence. The mountain today. Mount Kurahane is open to the public again. Hikers return, children climb its trails, mushrooms still grow after autumn rains. There is no marker where Ayeri was found, only trees and wind. Those who know the story say the mountain feels different now, not haunted, but heavy, as if it remembers. Perhaps it does. A final reflection. This case was never just about one crime. It was about how systems fail quietly, how danger hides in routine, how ordinary people can cause extraordinary harm without drawing attention. It was also about patience. Forensics did not rush, technology did not forget, and time eventually revealed what had been buried. Ayeri Takahashi was 19 years old. She liked languages. She walked to save money. She trusted the world enough to believe she would get home. She didn't, but her story changed how others are protected. And in that way, she is not only remembered, she is heard.